Okay. Very good. I think we're about to get everyone inside. Good evening. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, survivors, and friends. My name is Rodney Slater, and I'm the chair and the president of the National Archives Foundation Board. The foundation is the nonprofit partner of the National Archives, and for over 30 years, we have supported the agency's incredible work and mission to provide access to its vast holdings, to all of our nation's citizens, and to increase civic engagement, as well as to reflect on our nation's history through the various documents held by the National Archives. Your presence tonight is a testament to the significance of this event. We gather on this day of remembrance to reflect on a painful chapter in our nation's history, when American citizens were forcibly removed from their homes and their communities simply because of their Japanese heritage. Reflecting on the motto of the National Archives, what is past is prologue. It is through learning from our nation's past that we can begin to better understand, also to celebrate perseverance and human dignity, as well as entering the spirit of our nation's founders and framers who sought to create a more perfect union and to ensure that those difficult days of the past remain in the past and that our future is ever brighter. The archives contain invaluable records, personal stories, official documents that allow us access and that allow us to understand the magnitude of what occurred in years past. These records do more than simply catalog historical events. They give us the ability to reflect, to learn, and to teach. In their pages, we find not only the history of those who suffered, but also the voices of those who fought for justice in the moment and clearly in the aftermath. As we reflect on the past, we must also recognize the power of partnerships and collaboration. Collaboration between communities, collaboration among organizations and individuals. These collaborations create lasting change. The foundation would like to thank the Japanese American National Museum, the Irei Project, the Japanese American Citizens League, and the JACL DC chapter, as well as the National Museum of American History for partnering with us on tonight's program and to kick off in DC this national tour of the Ireichō book that lists the names of people of Japanese ancestry incarcerated during World War II. I had the opportunity to stamp the name of a dear friend of mine, Norman Y. Mineta. Norm and I served in the Clinton administration. He was the Secretary of Commerce, and I was the Secretary of Transportation, and then he followed me as Secretary of Transportation. So he served in a Democratic administration with Clinton and in a Republican administration with George W. Bush. Just the kind of person reflected in the rich heritage that we honor and celebrate this evening. It is my pleasure to also acknowledge Masaharu Ishii. Is he here? Right here? 100 years old. 100 years old, and we understand that you stamped the name of your sister and that you reflected on sharing your impressions during the bombing of Pearl Harbor, which you were able to witness. And so we thank you for your service and for the history that you honor and reflect. Tonight's program, again, is a time for reflection and an opportunity for all of us to engage in meaningful dialogue. Fortunately, we have a distinguished panel to lift up issues of importance and concern, to help us, through their voices, connect with this powerful and, yes, touching and, yes, beautiful history. They will help us to reflect on the difficult and troubling moments of that history. They will challenge our assumptions. They will inspire us to continue to work towards justice and reconciliation. I now have the pleasure of introducing the moderator of tonight's panel, Dr. Anthea Hartig. Dr. Hartig has a long and distinguished record of accomplishment throughout her career. She is currently the Elizabeth Macmillan Director at the Smithsonian National Museum of American History, and she is the first woman to occupy that position. Please join me in, yes, a warm welcome for Dr. Hartig.
Thank you so much, Secretary Slater, and it's so wonderful and affirming on today of all days to be with you here. It's a humbling honor indeed, and often a humbling superpower to think about leading your National Museum of American History. And I do so, of course, in collaboration with so many wonderful colleagues, many of whom have helped make tonight happen, and all of you who have joined us, whether you've been on this earth 100 years or a few less, you are, of course, part of the great weave of this remarkable thing we call the past, as we come together to understand what it looks like to create a more just and compassionate future. Before we begin, let us acknowledge that we are here in Washington, D.C., in the layered and complex place, originally home to the Paumanki and Acostine and Aconstant tribes. This is a very dense and meaningful place that many of us call home, and certainly to which we welcome you tonight. But with humility in our hearts, let us also think about the long, long history of this land that we are occupying. Sorry. We're grateful, of course, to our partners, the incredible work of the National Archives, the National Archives Foundation, the partners who have been mentioned. It really does take a remarkable set of commitments, of shared kind of humility and grace and hard work to make something like this happen. So thank you, and especially thank you to Patrick Madden and Jim and Val and everyone from the Archives Foundation to make today happen. Tomorrow is, of course, a very important day as we think about the way in which Executive Order 9066, after 83 years, is remembered. how it's brought forth and woven into that incredible weave of our lives and the lives of those ancestors we care for. It's also my 6th anniversary with the Smithsonian. As I like to say, you know, history, nothing's really been happening lately. History hasn't been very busy, but what a truly remarkable honor it's been to help try and document, interpret, and understand this incredible last 6 years. But before I came, I was so incredibly fortunate to work alongside my colleagues from the Asian American and Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander communities, to learn, to explore, to reveal, and to honor the complicated legacies surrounding this moment. It's been one of the joys of my career to work from the Harada House in Riverside, California, to Minidoka Incarceration Camp in rural South Central Idaho. And last year, I had the incredible honor of attending the pilgrimage of the Heart Mountain World War II incarceration site in Wyoming, and the opening of the Manetta Simpson Institute. And thus, I extend my lasting gratitude to each of you, individually and collectively, to your families, to our Nikkei sisters and brothers who have come before us, on all those here now and all those in the future who will carry this important work forward. At the museum, our mission is to empower people to create that just and more compassionate future by preserving and collecting and sharing the complexities of our past. And we see public history as an important educational and civic component of a democratic society. Learning history helps people understand that today's world is not inevitable, but the result of a myriad of choices and actions made by individuals and communities. Today's program reflects the many dimensions of American history, the histories that we hold at the archives, the history that we hold at the Japanese American National Museum, and we think about the histories that, of course, we hold in the National Collection here in Washington. We're focusing, of course, on 2 key documents: Executive Order 9066, signed by Franklin D. Roosevelt 83 years ago tomorrow, and of course, the recently published Ireichō, the Book of Names. When we think about the long history that led up to 1942, I think it bears mention that the anti-Asian and anti-immigrant sentiments to which the Japanese Americans were imprisoned was a key lead up to that fateful day. Notable laws, of course, that Congress passed, from the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act to the 1913, if you think of the California alien land laws, making migrants ineligible for U.S. citizenship or from buying or leasing land. All of these moments led up to the context in which mass incarceration was acceptable and enacted. As we know, this was, according to the Commission on the Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians report that were established in 1983, Executive Order 906 was, quote, not justified by military necessity, and the decisions which followed it, exclusion, detention, and the ending of detention and the ending of exclusion, were not founded upon any military conditions. The causes were simply, quote, race prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership, end quote. Today, we come together to acknowledge the weight of that history, and of course, to acknowledge this truly remarkable, movable monument in the Ireichō. Thanks to the vision and work of Dr. Duncan Williams, his research team, many of you in the Japanese American national community, think about this book of 125,284 names of all those who were incarcerated. This remarkable project humanizes the number with the names and then the very healing act of stamping and memorializing the people that the government wrongly tried to erase. take a moment with me and center your breath and remember both the survivors who we have with us, but then all those who did not survive. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Duncan, and I'll introduce him briefly, and then our two other amazing panelists. But as we think about the Ireichō coming from Los Angeles, from its home, his first home, and then tomorrow it'll be at the National Museum of American History for 3 afternoons, and then taking it truly on a nationwide tour. What a beautiful and inspiring example that's educational, it's restorative, it's healing. And that's the power that collections like those in the archives and museums like ours and at JANM and so many others can have. And we're very grateful to the National Archives as an essential part of the foundation of our democratic nation. For it is in the archives that the Irei project team were able to retrieve the hidden names of those 125,284 people. So I'm going to tell you a quick bit about Duncan. The Reverend Dr. Duncan Williams is currently Professor of Religion and East Asian Languages and Cultures and the Director of the USC Shinso Ito Center for Japanese Religions and Culture. Because he didn't have enough to do, he's also formerly the chair of USC's School of Religion. He's been ordained since 1993 as a Buddhist priest in the Soto Zen tradition. He's the author of numerous books, and of course, most importantly for us tonight, he's going to share about the amazing Ireichō project. After Duncan's presentation, we're going to turn to Shirley Higuchi. Shirley Ann Higuchi is the chair of the Heart Mountain, Wyoming Foundation, and is the daughter of former incarcerees, Dr. William Higuchi and the late Setsuko Sayato Higuchi. Shirley has worked tirelessly to bring both the stories of her family and so many others, especially at Heart Mountain, into the light. Somehow, obviously, she just retired from being the chief counsel of the American Psychological Association and is president-elect of the American Bar Association. Finally, but certainly not lastly, dear colleague Anne Burroughs, who's the president and CEO of the Japanese American National Museum in Los Angeles, as well as the National Center for the Preservation of Democracy, will kind of help round out a little bit of the experience, certainly that of the Ireichō that started in Los Angeles. Anne came to JANM, as it's shorthanded, as you know, after 9 years at Amnesty International, including Deputy Western Regional Director and Media Director. Prior to that, she was the advisor to the General Secretary of the South African Council of Churches. And she still serves, I believe, as the chair of the Japanese American Confinement Site Consortium, as well as serving on the board of the Heart Mountain Foundation and an advisory council to the Minetta Simpson Institute. Her partnership with Duncan really, I think, has brought the amazing Ireichō to life. So thank you again for joining. I'm going to turn it over to Duncan, and then as he finishes, then we'll come up and take your questions. You should all receive little index cards, maybe. Yeah? Perfect. Since there's no center aisle, if you have questions or thoughts or something you'd like us to remember and take with us, please pass them to the ends. And then I think my colleagues Magdalena Meri and Noriko Senafuji will help kind of gather them and then bring them down for the last portion of tonight, which will be your questions and hopefully our answers, but sharing and conversation together. So thank you again, and it's an honor to bring up Duncan.
So thank you to the secretary, thank you for the welcome, and Anthea for the kind introduction. My role today is to say a quick few words about the Ireichō upstairs. And I'm going to do it through these questions up on the screen about why is it called the Ireichō. Oh, I'm sorry, can you hear me okay? why is it called the Ireichō? Why we focus on names? Why hasn't a names list been compiled before? And why is it in the form of a book? And why does stamping it matter? And so I want to start with just the etymology of it. Chō in Japanese means book or record. And Irei, consoling the spirits. And this word is obviously an invented word, but it's not invented in the sense of it's very much inspired by the World War II Irei monuments built by those incarcerated at 3 different War Relocation Authority camps. And probably this image is the one that would be, for this audience, most familiar. It's the Ireichō. To means tower, so Consoling Spirits Tower at Manzanar standing today. It was built under the inspiration of Reverend Shinjo Nagatomi. He's the father of my mentor in graduate school, and that's how I came to know about this monument. It's his calligraphy. And when I translated his diary, he talked about how he was worried that when you make a concrete monument, like if you you can't mess up the calligraphy. And so he talked about that. He also talked about this idea that, Irei, consoling spirits, what it means. And he talked about the idea here that says, you not only, as a Buddhist priest, for example, that first year you had to do so many funerals and memorial services of people who died, the vulnerable who died in camp the first fall of 42 into winter 43. And he said, it's not just about consoling the spirits of those who've passed on, but it's about the spirits of those who remain. And that idea has been at the heart of what we've been doing at the Irei Project. He thought to build this monument in time for the Obon. It's like the Buddhist version of the Day of the Dead. It's like a week of the dead every summer. And he wanted to build it by August 15th of 1943, Obon, after that first year in camp. And what he thought was, if the government doesn't care about us, we are going to be the ones who remember the spirits of those who died in this camp. And so that's the background to the Ireichō in Manzanar. And he felt always that a monument is not something you just look at, but memorial services, going up to the monument, placing, so it's a ritual action. And so you'll hear me talk a little bit more about why we think that's an important part of what it means to have a book monument. Same thing in Rower. There's a Irei there and Ireichō in Amachi. And this is where I want to transition into names. You can see in the monument they built in the Ireichō monument, the Consoling Spirits monument in Amachi, Colorado, that they included the names of not only those who died in camp at Amachi in Colorado, but those who, from the families at Amachi, had either been, either volunteered or had been drafted to serve in the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, that Japanese-American segregated unit that served in the European theater, and the Military Intelligence Service, the MIS, that served in the Pacific theater. And so they listed all their names. And I think they listed those names because, and this is why I'm going to get into it, Japanese Americans from the very beginning of their immigration to America have often been treated as if they're nameless. The first Japanese that came across the Pacific worked on the sugar plantations in Hawaii. And on the screen you see these little numbers. Those are called bango, which in Japanese just means number. But that's what they were given. Yamaguchi, Yamakuni, Yamagawa. It's too complicated for the plantation overseers, so they just gave them numbers. And that kind of treatment of people is, I think, what happened with the executive order that led to forced removal and the unjust incarceration. The executive order you see upstairs, if you read it closely, it doesn't mention the word Japan, Japanese, Japanese-American. And yet the target of that executive order is clear, not in that document from February, but in the April 1943 document, a memo from then Attorney General Francis Biddle to the president, a part of which reads, you signed the original executive order permitting the exclusion so that the Army could handle the Japs. That's the wording of that period. It was never intended to apply to Italians and Germans. So even though the executive order was, I guess the lawyers crafted it in such that it could pass some kind of muster, the intent was clear. And so it was that the effects, the forced removal, the unjust incarceration, in some cases family separation, that was something that applied to every person of Japanese ancestry in the Western Defense Command Zone. Lieutenant General John DeWitt, the so-called architect of the removal and incarceration, even used the words when he was visiting. It was an orphanage in Little Tokyo, in Los Angeles, an orphanage run by the Maryknoll Catholic Church. And at that time, because of anti-misogyny, there was a lot of these kids, you know, you couldn't marry across races, so they had to give up kids. So there's a lot of these mixed race babies and 5-year-olds in this orphanage. And when the orphanage director directly asked DeWitt, does the executive order apply to these babies and kids? His answer was, if they have a single drop of Japanese blood in them, I want them in camp. And so that's how thorough that effect of the executive order was. And it didn't matter in that sense if you're a little baby or an infirm grandmother. It didn't matter if you're a Japanese immigrant or a US citizen. Everyone with a drop of blood went to camp. And that, as Anthea mentioned, has a precedent, exclusion. She mentioned the Chinese Exclusion Act. And there was talk back then also of certain people, because they call it, you know, unassimilable racially, unacceptable religiously, heathen meaning non-Christian, that the Chinese before the Japanese also experienced certain kinds of immigration exclusion and a kind of second-class status in the United States. And so our response to that situation was, can we, when a community is conflated like that with the enemy and being told, you know, you're un-American, even anti-American, a threat to national security, what is our response to that in our time? Because these are people who were treated, unlike the Germans and Italian nationals, who were treated as individuals, given parole hearings. There's no due process for the Japanese American community. So how do we, in that undifferentiated conflation of an entire group with the enemy, respond? And so our answer at the Irei Project has been names. And it's been hard to create, and you'd think like at this point, all these years, 80, you know, some years after what happened, there would be a comprehensive and accurate list of names. But, and you know, with redress and so on, but there hasn't been. And so our team has worked really hard, and we thank the National Archives, you know, all of the records, not just the camp rosters, it's the train transfer list, it's the internee index cards, et cetera, from the National Archives that's helped this project create its list. It's been the list created by those incarcerees and internees themselves, sometimes in Japanese, that we've transcribed. That's been layered onto our project. But oftentimes, in the government documents, and you see here in this index card, they actually make a note of like the misspelling of names. You can't, in our estimation, have a comprehensive and accurate list of names if, and honor the people therein if you misspell their names. And so our project's been also very focused on getting the names right. And so let me now transition to why do we have a book of names, and then what's its meaning. The book of names, the form, we have precedents as well. The kakocho, the book of the past, literally kocho means past, kako means past. These books of names of the past, people who've come before you, ancestors. And in our project, our creative director, Sun-Ying Lee, decided that a book monument, something that would be not usually seen as a monument, could be a method to get those names in a sequence and an order and a design that would be, in some sense, compelling as a monument, but not in the traditional way. If a traditional way is, the more permanent it is, the better. The bigger it is, the better. We scaled it down. We said, how about intimacy? How about interactivity? How about the fact that it changes is actually a good thing? All those people stamping, it actually accumulates into something that actually is giving more and more meaning each day. And we said we have to do this with community. And so we asked camp survivors and descendants to collect soil from 75 different camps, and we infused it in the clay that are in the ceramic pieces that bookend this book of names. And we said, let us come to an understanding of stamping the names. And here's where I would like to conclude. Everyone who stamps the name, all of you, many of you have already participated and will be coming up in the days ahead at the Smithsonian, are contributing to healing the past. This is our belief that we ourselves are the monument. And the project is Janum. At Janum, we had, this campaign over 2 years, and we got to 81,000 plus names. But we need to get to every name being acknowledged. Each name matters. And this is my final slide. We're going to start here in DC for the national tour. And just a few minutes ago, as was mentioned by the secretary, 100-year-old Masaharu Ishii found his sister's name. And it's not just him, but all of you, everyone making that small movement in this book, but also in our lives today. Every small movement can reverberate. And so we really thank you for being, you are the monument. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me here this evening. I stand before you not as a lawyer, a mother, and a grandmother, but I stand before you as a Sansei daughter of incarcerated of Heart Mountain, who are children, along with Secretary Norman Mineta and 10,000 others. And I think the reason why this project, Duncan, is so important is because for us, the descendants and the current survivors, it gives us an opportunity to step in the shoes of our parents and grandparents and say that we are here. We were here, and we matter. And that's why this research is so important. So, Duncan, thank you so much for sharing. I'm now trying to figure out how to move this. After that dramatic entrance. An emotional entrance. No. But what Duncan talked about, what I thought was interesting, was this ritual of healing and consoling the spirits and those who have remained. And he wasn't able to get this to work. Okay. Okay. I wonder if we can get. Huh. It's pretty dark up here, so it's. Apologies.
No, that's fine. It may just be a setting on.
But, the DOR, the Day of Remembrance, is a very emotional time period for not only survivors, but also for the descendants. Because what happens is that for many Japanese Americans, and I consider myself a Sansei daughter, a survivor of a situation that affected my parents and grandparents, you really want to know what happened, right? But what happened was that in our casebooks and in law school and in my high school and undergrad, they never really talked about what happened to the Japanese Americans ever. And my parents never talked about it. That's why they had that book that Bill Hosokawa wrote, Nisei, The Quiet American. My parents never talked about it. And it didn't help that I grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where there were no Japanese Americans. And all of my friends were white and black kids and students that I hung out with. But this story, and the reason why this project is significant is that, being the chair of Heart Mountain, we get calls from the community, and they somehow think just because, we run this museum in Wyoming, we have all the answers. And there was one grandson who now lives in Salt Lake City, Utah. He's in his 70s, and he wanted to find out what happened to his grandfather, Sunichi Nakamoto. And he goes, I'm almost certain he was in Heart Mountain. And then we're like, well, we'll do the research. We have an obligation to help you and to tap into your family history. And because of the database that Duncan had worked on, we found that he wasn't incarcerated at Heart Mountain and that he had been sent to 5 different camps in 4 states and certainly had suffered a great deal. And he was sent back to Japan in 1943 on the Gripsholm, which was a Swedish ocean liner used to exchange prisoners between Japan and the United States. We also obtained additional records from the National Archives, so we're able to weave and blend in what we can get from the archives, what we got from the project, and we're able to help this gentleman who's now 70 years old find more information about his grandfather. So for that, we feel that it's important that we preserve the archives, and we continue to support a database that has included so many incarcerees. Another thing that happened, and 6 degrees of separation, that's what we say at Heart Mountain. Everyone is connected in some weird way, A lot of them were connected through Norm Mineta too, by the way. I mean, that's half of us in here are connected by Norm. But I was speaking at a conference in Honolulu. It was a mental health conference. And this young Yonsei, Erica Bar-David, came up to me and said that she needs to find out more about her great-grandfather. And she knew that he had been repatriated back to Japan during the war, but not much else. And she began researching and trying to find out more about what happened. And she found out later that he was detained at the INS building in San Francisco, Fort Missoula, etc. But when she looked up his name in the Ireichō exhibit at JANM, she found out that he had, in his DOJ file as well, 5 shares of Sumitomo shares prior to his arrest. And it was this role that got him deported because he was involved in the financing, right, through the Bank of Japan. So what happened was that she had found out that somebody had stamped from the bank at JANM her grandfather's name. And it's through that now that she's discovering more about her family history. And, she's grateful that she was able to find out that connection about what happened. And the photo I was taken at JANM, that's me stamping the book when I was out in LA on my many visits. And I was stamping my grandmother's name, Chie Higuchi, my father's mother, who really was an amazing woman and was able to have all her children live throughout all that, as opposed to my mother's side, where a lot of people ended up dying because of that experience. So it was really empowering for me to recognize her and stamp her name. So that was my experience with that stamping. This next slide are all National Archives photos and documentation that we've been able to obtain through the National Archives. We recently released this book, Heart Mountain Incarceration Site, and virtually most of the research from this book came from the National Archives. We could not have written this book. I couldn't have written my previous book and my family history without the archives. So we need to make sure that we continue to support this resource so we can continue to find more about our families. And so here are the images that have been obtained from Heart Mountain that we have used in our book. And it's really amazing that many of this landscape now, if you come out and visit us at Heart Mountain, many of it is very similar, including the fact that we've restored the root cellar that you are now able to walk into, where we'll have exhibits on the agricultural developments that Heart Mountain obtained historically. So in addition to the National Archives and the Ireichō Project and others, we've always really encouraged people that contact us to make sure that you talk to your grandparents and your parents while they're still alive and your great-grandparents. There's nothing like that firsthand information And then now tapping into the Ireichō database as well as the archive database, you could begin to construct your own life story. And here are photos of Heart Mountain. The first one is from the National Archives. The second one is my personal collection of my parents in Heart Mountain in their 9th grade photograph sitting next to each other. And the last one is a National Archives photo as well. So it's just an invaluable resource that we've all benefited from. Lastly, you know, when we think about the fear and the anger that is constantly occurring in our world today, I think it's really important for us to look at role models of individuals that we want to emulate, that we really want to support, that have been able to work together. What we're really proud about at Heart Mountain is the Minetta Simpson Institute that opened up last summer, and we are so proud of it. It's emulating Secretary Norman Minetta, who is incarcerated at Heart Mountain, who is a Democrat, or who was a Democrat, and then recognizing Senator Alan K. Simpson, a Republican. And they were able to work across the aisle on many projects, including supporting the story of Japanese Americans, and most importantly, the work that we've accomplished at Heart Mountain. So I think in many ways, all of this ties together, the work that Duncan Williams does, the work the Smithsonian does, the work that Ann Burroughs does at JANM, and what we do at Heart Mountain and all the sites. What we're trying to do is trying to tell our history. And without knowing your history, you're going to be half a person or a quarter of a person. To become a whole person, you need to understand where you came from, what your family's experienced, and the importance of learning what happened to them so things like that don't happen ever again to anyone else. So thank you very much. And I'm glad to be here. And I want to present this book to Secretary Slater, and I have one for the other speakers as well. Yeah. Sure.
Thank you, Anthea, for the kind introduction. Secretary Slater, thank you so much for hosting us this evening. Thank you to the National Archives Foundation, the National Museum of American History, the Irei Project, JACL DC chapter, and all of our community partners who've helped to bring this event to life this evening. It's a real honor. It's a real honor to be here on this panel, to be with all of you. On behalf of all of us at JANM, thank you to all of you for joining us in the launch of the national tour of the Ireichō, which is a joint initiative between the Irei Project and JANM. So it's no accident that we're launching this tour in Washington, D.C. on the day before the Day of Remembrance, in the city where Japanese American incarceration was set into motion. It was here in 1942, of course, that executive order was signed. And now we stand just steps away from the very document. In the hallway, we have copies of Executive 9066, but across the street in the National Archives is the original Executive Order 9066. Executive Order 9066, I'm sorry. I'm about to trip on these cables here. But it's, you know, here we are, steps away from the Ireichō, alongside copies of Executive Order 9066, the book, the sacred book that gathered the names of everybody who was incarcerated. And of course, the symbolism of this is profound, and I don't think that it's lost on any of us here tonight. Side by side, these two artifacts tell a story of loss and resilience, of exclusion and remembrance. One represents the machinery of state-sanctioned injustice, and the other, the power of a community that refuses to let its history be erased. So what I want to talk about in my remarks this evening is this idea of memory, of monument, and of repair, and of the future, and how all four of those ideas are threaded through in the Ireichō. So we're not here just to remember the past, just to mark the past, but we're here to engage in an act of memory, an act of witness to the past, but also an act of repair of the past. Today we launch the national tour of the Ireichō. We reaffirm our responsibility to ensure that remembrance is not passive, but that it's an active force for justice and that it's an active force for the social good. We know from our own histories, whether it's American history, whether it's my own history as a South African, that there is enormous power in memory, and there's enormous power in the naming of names. What we choose to remember, how we remember, defines who we are as a nation. Too often, history is shaped by omission, by the erasure of names, and by what remains unsaid. And the Ireichō, the Irei project, challenges that silence. A sacred book of names, each of those names representing a life, a family, a story, and a history. And every stamp placed on its pages is an affirmation. You were here. You mattered. You will not be forgotten. Since we installed the Ireichō at Janum, it was October 2022, more than 81,485 names have been stamped out of 125,000 plus. People have traveled from across the country and across the globe to make a pilgrimage to Janum, to find their families, to stamp their names, to witness and to connect the past with the present. The act of memory, that act of memory is essential. But the Ireichō is more than a record of remembrance. It's a monument. It's a redefinition of what a monument is. We know that monuments tell stories, but very often, invariably, monuments celebrate only a select few, while entire communities are erased. The Ireichō offers a different kind of monument, one that is not measured by its permanence, but by the power that accrues with each stamping, by the participation of each of you who's placed a stamp next to those names. Duncan didn't mention this, but I will. But one of the things that he has spoken about so incredibly eloquently is that the stamping of the names in the Ireichō is an act of kintsugi, repairing the erasure of history by making memory visible, permanent, and undeniable. And each stamp placed in the book changes the substance and changes the energy of that book. The Irei project was funded by the Mellon Foundation's Monument Project. And the reason that I'm mentioning it, because it's a seminal initiative that has helped all of us in the museum community, that has helped the people of America to understand and to rethink the nation's commemorative landscape. And it was because of that visionary initiative, because of that extraordinary support, that the incredible work of Duncan and the Irei project team, that the names and the stories of Japanese Americans that were incarcerated during World War II are acknowledged, honored, and made an enduring part of our collective history. We also have an incredible debt to the National Archives, because without that resource, they are entrusted with storing the documents of the history of this nation. And without that resource, those names would not be made, they would not be unerased. Without their resources, an institution like Janum could not do its work. We could not pay homage to the history of this nation that is so incredibly important that we preserve. And now we launch our national tour. And as the Secretary said earlier on, it's an incredible moment for us. It's an incredible moment that we're doing it here. It's an incredible moment for Janum to be partnering with the Irei project to take this across the country. It'll travel to Arizona, Arkansas, California, Colorado, Idaho, Texas, Utah, and Wyoming, and other places. The very places where Japanese Americans were incarcerated. So the book will touch the ground of those incarceration sites, but it will not return as a relic, but as a living monument, as an act of repair, not only for individuals and families, but for the nation itself. And to bring the Ireichō here to DC, where this injustice was set in motion, is also an extraordinary act of reckoning. It challenges us to think about what we choose to commemorate, who we choose to honor, and whose names we refuse to forget. And in so doing, we're challenged to take responsibility for ensuring that history is told fully and truthfully, and that its lessons endure. And the incarceration of Japanese Americans is not just a chapter of history. It's a warning. It's a warning of the consequences of failed leadership and injustice. And it's a warning of what can happen when the lessons of history are ignored. What we choose to remember and how we choose to remember it matters. Each name stamped is an answer to the questions. What do we carry forward? What do we refuse to forget? What is our obligation to history? Because in the end, monuments are not just about the past. They're about the future we choose to shape. Thank you so much.
Oh, careful. Oh, yep. Okay. That was great. We were so lovingly mic'd by the nice technician here at the Naval Memorial Auditorium. Thank you, wherever you are, good sir. And then I think, Magdalena, anybody have questions that they've already passed down? Or pass them down now? Then as they're collecting them, I think I'll ask the panel. First, thank you to the panelists. Thank you for those heartfelt reminders and expressions of the kind of care, the kind of collaboration, the kind of pain, and the kind of openness that I think stewarding the stories, doing the research, and really kind of living in this moment. And it's very much a joy to bring the Ireichō to Washington, as has been mentioned. We like our monuments, and have a very long history, right, of what it means to invest in the monumentality of the nation's core set of memories and the core set of leaders, and to bring the Ireichō here again as that very powerful kind of moving monument is incredibly special. Reverend Duncan, who owns the Ireichō? Is there any concern for the protection of the book? And is there any risk that it could be confiscated or destroyed?
We flew in yesterday. We flew in yesterday. Karen Kano, who was out there helping with the stamping.
You know what, Duncan? I think your mic's off. Can I see your cute little? I think when it fell, it might have turned off. Want to test
Hello?
again?
Yes. No. Hello. I will speak loudly.
Duncan, do you want to use mine for the people online?
Oh, I see. Let's share. All right.
Here, just use mine. Okay. Just talk like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
He needs your mic.
The Ireichō belongs obviously to this country and to all of you. Its final home will be the Japanese American National Museum in Los Angeles, but as has been mentioned, it's really something that has been created by everyone, and so it belongs to the nation. We've been taking, there's only one copy, so we are concerned about safety, and Karen, who was upstairs, was strapped in right next to, we had to buy an extra seat for the Ireichō,
yes.
And there's an air tag in there. So we've taken every measure to make sure we get it through this national tour safely.
That's beautiful. One of the questions was the percentage of the incarcerated included in the book, and every single one, that 125,000 plus. Unless this was the question, no one was excluded, do you think? No? You did such hard work.
Yes, so that's been our two main principles. Let us make sure that no one is left out, and let us make sure everybody's names are spelled correctly. We have a few, we call them addendum. When we printed it, we said 99%. We think we're now 99.8%. We're trying to get closer, but we never say we're not 100%. Everybody is for sure. But we've been printing these addendum when we find out there was somebody that we missed somehow. And that's also part of the
That's beautiful, though, right?
evolving
That living quality,
process, and
yeah.
people letting us know.
Yeah, wonderful. Did the photographs of Dorothea Lange offer any documentary support in identifying or validating names? For you, Duncan.
No, I don't think the photographs themselves did that, but I think one of the ideas that's behind the online version of the project, we call it the person behind the name, but we've been partnering with different organizations that have large collections of people, so that behind the name, you know, when you can see a photograph of that, you see a person. And so whether it's Dorothea Lange's photos or these many different collections of photos in institutions, in families, that's another way we kind of, you know, honor the people who are behind the name.
Yeah, that's beautiful. One of the perhaps little known, although to this educated crowd may be known, facts is that the very first exhibition about the incarceration in 9066 out of the California Historical Society was in 1972. So 30 years, so very raw, very real emotions still, of course, circulating. And they used almost entirely the archival collection of the Dorothea Lange photographs. That was the first exhibition on incarceration and the first one to travel. And so I love to think about, not just because I used to work there, but I love to think about then the role that you've heard tonight, right, of museums, of historical societies, of repositories, of advocacy organizations, really of the whole kind of community of how we remember. So, Shirley, what do you think, because you spoke so beautifully in reflection of the Ireichō, what do you think is a common misconception about Japanese American incarceration that this project will help correct? And I think you could speak maybe to Heart Mountain and to the Ireichō.
That it wasn't a camp, that was a fun place to be, which is one message I got growing up. The camp wasn't too bad. After all, that's where I met Dad, so how bad could it be? That people suffered. And I think that with respect to the Ireichō project, it's recognizing all those that were incarcerated. So the examples that I talked about, it would have been difficult to identify what happened to Erica Barr's grandfather and the previous individual from Salt Lake City because there was no record that was easily accessible. Yeah. So you helped these grandchildren connect to their past and their family in a way that they would have never known. And to die not knowing is the worst feeling, I think, that any individual can experience, not knowing what happened to your family.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. Very nice note. Someone says, thank you. More than anyone can imagine, this is immeasurable. Thank you. So thank you for writing that. And then the question is, if we have photographs, et cetera, from the incarceration time, do you want them, scans of them, and how do we do this? I think you could talk probably to me or to Anne, to the archives. I think and please find me afterwards and find any one of us, but I think the most important thing about those special family memories that then you've been taking care of and stewarding is if you decide to keep them or scan them, when you decide to give them, just make sure that you feel a great level of trust with those who care for them, that it's an incredible power when someone gives you an object, and we steward over 2 million of them, and 4 miles of archival material at the museum. It's a beautiful relationship of trust and caring in that stewardship. So I think anyone would be honored to talk to you about any of the family collections. And then Anne, your collection is amazing. Maybe you want to say a little bit about the collection in Los Angeles?
Sure. So we have about, it depends if it's me or if it's our director of of the collection speaking. We have about, and we have somebody from our collections task force here, so she might correct me, one of our trustees. But we have about 160,000 objects in our collection. And, you know, it's a collection that it's the repository of record of Japanese American history, and the collection spans from immigration, early immigration, through the incarceration experience, the post-war experience, the resettlement, as well as we have objects from, we also have objects from the civil rights era. And we're also now collecting objects that tell a more comprehensive story. Our collection, most of our collection is up until the incarceration. But we also know that the Japanese American experience didn't end with the Second World War, and that we need to be able to reflect that not just in the stories we tell, but also in our collection.
Yeah, beautifully said. We're closing in on time, and there's a nice question I was just handed, maybe for Duncan and for Anne. Was there a particular impetus to start the Ireichō? I think you kind of gave us a beautiful contextualization of both the monuments in camp and then how traditionally that has that both reflects both the spirit, especially I love hearing the story of how you're connected through your mentors. Did anything or anyone or any incident in particular inspire the project?
On my end, I was involved with a group called Tsuru for Solidarity. Tsuru means a crane in Japanese, and using like origami paper to fold cranes is a traditional Japanese way of kind of infusing a prayer, a wish. And there was some people who were organizing around some of these difficult issues of our times around immigration and so forth, reflecting that some of these camps used back in World War II were being repurposed for other reasons. And so I was just commissioned to have I was a ceremony person because I'm a Buddhist priest. So I was like, let's do we'll do some chanting, and then we'll read the names of everyone who was incarcerated back in World War II, and then also read the names of those who've maybe died in facilities in more modern times, and we'll get different communities together, and it'll be a kind of group reading project. And that's when it became very clear there was no such organized list, and different efforts had been done at the Office of Redress Administration, where they did have paper files, and I interviewed staffers there. They were like, Duncan, we didn't have Excel file, the paper things flying all over the place, and so it seemed like this was high time to compile a truly comprehensive and also accurate list.
And thank you, too, for mentioning Tsuru for Solidarity. I know a number of people who are here, Julie, I saw earlier, David, of course, Inoue, and your leadership, really bringing and tying together our ongoing and very challenging set of conversations about who belongs and who's American and how and when can they live in this land. So pretty powerful.
So my memory, my impetus for this was actually, we had a gathering on our plaza at Janum, on the Norman Y. Mineta Democracy Plaza at Janum, and it was just after the protests at Fort Sill, when the folks from Tsuru for Solidarity had come back, and we had this protest action. It was a gathering. It started as a gathering. We were also incredibly alarmed by the separation of children from their families and the incarceration of the children and their families. And I remember Duncan and I spoke about this afterwards, and you were so emotional about what you had experienced when you were at Fort Sill and what we were seeing in the images of the separation of children and the incarceration of their children. And you said, we have to do something. We have to do something, and we have to gather the names. And I said, we're in, we'll do it, however we can support you. So that was my memory of it. That was my memory, and I said, we're there.
And now it's here in Washington and launching its national tour with all of you, embracing both the project, the memory, and the important legacies that are entwined with this important day of remembrance. And so I think we'll all remember this. I want to extend my gratitude to Anne and Shirley and Duncan, to the National Archives Foundation, to the National Archives, to all of our partners, and to all of you and those who are watching us online. We didn't mean to ignore you. We can't really see you, but we're really thrilled that you've chosen to spend time with us this evening. So thank you. Be safe. Stay well. Thank you.